Om Brahmanandam Paramasukadam Kevalam Jnanamurtim Dvandvatitam Ganganasadrisham Tattvamasyadilaksham Ekam Nityam Vimalamachalam Sarvadi Sakshibhutam Bhavatitam Trigunarahitam Sadgurum Tam Namami.
Dear Seeker of Truth, welcome. This work that we are going to talk about is one of the most sacred dialogues because it happens between two enlightened beings. One is Ashtavakra, the other is King Janaka, which was Ashtavakra's disciple. So in it you will have a glimpse of the instruction of an enlightened being so that you can achieve liberation, and also the vision of how a liberated being stands, acts, what is his experience. So pay attention to these teachings, fill your heart with surrender, devotion, sacredness, because that is the way to enjoy it the most. May it blossom in your heart. May you also find liberation. Continuing, chapter 12, Ashtavakra Samhita, abiding in the self. Janaka continues in verse 5. A stage of life or no stage of life, meditation, control of mental functions, finding that these cause distraction to me, thus verily do I firmly abide. So finding that all these considerations to all of these things cause distraction to me that am established in quietude, completely, continuously established in quietude. Thus do I firmly abide. Or in the case of the self-realized being that is established in the self, all these things, they are unimportant. They don't cause distraction because they are irrelevant. But they are useless for me that abide in the self. But in the case of the one who is climbing the ladder of consciousness and reaches the point of quietude, all these considerations, they become distractions, whence he's gotten rid of distraction. So in the beginning, and for a certain amount of time, whatever that means, all these stage of life has its duties. No stage of life is renunciation of the stage of life. All these are important. So the renunciation of the stage of life is important. The embracing of the highest dharma, which is liberation, is important. The practice of meditation, the control of mental functionings, to reach quietude. Because these things cause distraction, feed duality. So they are important. And I heard many times seekers saying, oh, but I sit for meditation, my mind gets still, doesn't wander. So the technique distracts me, making allusion to this type of teaching. But in the rest of the time, which is not on meditation, mind is in normal mode. So that stillness is not really stillness. It is a perception to enhance this rejecting a meditation technique to preserve noise and attachments. And it's not this. It's not that moment you sit for meditation. It is 24/7. And as long as there's distractions, as long as there's sense objects and they capture your attention, as long as your mind is moving away from the source, moving towards sense objects, all these things are important. Once you establish yourself in quietude, in stillness, mind is not wandering. It's just in that, then whatever consideration becomes a distraction. So if you're already in quietude, in stillness, 24/7, all these considerations become disturbance, distractions, and are discarded. And in the case of the self-realized being, it's like saying, well, if I'm going to focus in all of that, I'm getting distracted. But it's just a way, because distraction is not possible. Importance can be given a little bit into the play by the awakened one, but there's a limitation in that, because he cannot take it seriously. He knows it doesn't exist. He abides in the self. So in this case, for the awakened one, I don't bother with any stages of life or whatever is there. I abide solely in the self. And it continues. Abstention from action is as much the outcome of ignorance as the performance of action. This is very interesting. Knowing this truth fully well, thus do I firmly abide. So the seeker of the knower of truth knows that actions are not his. They are performed by the body, through the body, for the body alone. It has nothing to do with him. He is the self alone. Has nothing to do with this body or any other body. So they are performed by the body only. So knowing this fully well, I am not disturbed by that. I abide in the self. I'm not disturbed by the actions or the absence of actions performed or any of these considerations about action or absence of action. I firmly abide in myself, in the self. So now regarding the seeker of truth, these concepts of abstention from action, so renunciation of action, as much as the outcome of ignorance as the performance of action, because both can be used for liberation, both can be used to maintain ignorance, depending on why something is being used. And it's quite common to see seekers abstaining from action because of tamasic ideas, because they don't like it, because they think it's the best, or engaging in action for the same reasons, because they imagine that through action they will get everything. They still have the idea of control and all of this. So both of these, absence of action and engaging in action, may be tools for liberation or tools to maintaining illusion, depending on the whys it's being used. And usually, if you see a seeker of truth wondering about these things, whatever he's choosing, usually it is for the maintenance of illusion. So, which one is correct? That depends on the seeker of truth and his illusion, what he needs. Because if he is in a tamasic state, he will need to engage in action to purify that. And only after he is free from the resistances towards action, that renunciation of action is possible. But renunciation of action is because of the fruits of action and the maintenance of illusion. But all of these are prescribed by the master, by the guru, by guidance. Guidance knows what's important in this moment for the seeker of truth and what's not important. According to the stories, King Janaka wanted to renunciate the kingdom, his position as a king, and Ashtavakra told him to stay there. So he stayed there, not because he wanted, but because he was told to. Because the master knows what is best for the disciple. The disciple can only follow his inner urges as a fruit of his own conditioning, of his own illusion. And self-deception is one of the biggest obstacles in the spiritual quest. It works against liberation. So under guidance, when the process is serious, when your quest is serious, guidance will come eventually, has to come. And it is guidance that determines whether you engage into action, till when do you engage into action, and when you abstain from action. And that surely depends on what is the meaning of action. If you have a problem to engage in action, for example, or if you're exerting greed through action. But this has many unfoldings, can be by many reasons. But guidance knows best. And with guidance, there's no way the seeker can fall into the traps. There's always a way, because even if prescribed by certain actions, the seeker can still use that action in its own purpose. It's unavoidable. Because there's always the need to adapt things to maintain illusion. But through the constant clarification of the guru, with the prescribed spiritual practices and clarifications, and the fruit of those spiritual practices, mind gets purified more and more, and understanding comes more and more to align oneself with the direction the master is giving. Because by themselves, they mean nothing. Abstention from action or engaging in action, depending on your beliefs, both can feed your delusion and both can lead you to liberation. It's according to your own illusion, and that is for the master to prescribe. But in the case of the self-realized being, he firmly abides because he knows that truth very well. It's irrelevant. For the one who is detached with the body, who has realized the self, it's irrelevant, because the question of action and absence of action doesn't come. Nature does what it wants with the bodies. It is not I. It is nature. It is nature. So in a way, this vision can help the seeker of truth to disconnect from the actions which he sees and associates his hopes, his desires into those actions and expect fruits from them, or even associates his desires with the absence of action. The desires for liberation, for example, when it is coming from greed, it is the character that wants to be enlightened, to be important, to improve its life. So the guru gives the direction. So these concepts, they are able to be worked instead of arising and give fruit. And he continues, thinking on the unthinkable one only has recourse to a form of thought. Therefore, giving up that thought, thus do I firmly abide. Again, thinking on the unthinkable one, or meditating in the self, holding on to the self. No, this is different, a little bit. So thinking on the self, this implies one form of thought. The same with meditation, with a specific technique, apart from silence. Not forced silence. Okay, I will go to that. So, maintaining a meditation technique to practice concentration, or using the self as the meditation technique, the thought of the self as the meditation technique, this is very important, as there still are other thoughts in the mind, as there is still distraction. This is a must. It's like the boat is in the pier, strapped to the pier. Storm comes, that rope doesn't let the boat being carried by the storm destroyed. But when the boat wants to sail, that rope will not allow him to sail also. So the storm of the thoughts in the mind, the technique of meditation, the thought, the only thought of the self, makes the mind remain still in the midst of the storm of the thoughts and attachments, desires, sufferings, fragilities, and all of that. But when there are no more of these distractions, when you have purified the mind doesn't wander, doesn't go to sense objects, has no more attachments, no desires, nothing of that. Then that thought, that only thought, or that technique that you have to hold on to something, becomes a disturbance. It disturbs quietude. Therefore, giving up that thought, thus do I firmly abide. Well, in the case of the one who is in the quest for liberation, as he reaches this level of stillness, where that thought or that technique disturbs that stillness, then he gives up that thought and remains in that stillness. So that meditation, either it has become 24/7 and he remains in that continuously, independently or how the body is, doesn't matter, or if it continues also in the formal practice of sitting for meditation. So that becomes silent meditation. Just remaining in that stillness. Because it is in that stillness that the more subtle and deep mental impressions are getting dissolved, intensely being dissolved. In the case of the self-realized being, this thought is a nuisance. It doesn't do anything there. He abides in the self continuously. So this is like going back. It's like coming out from the natural state. So it makes no sense. So it is important to understand this, because many readings of this says, okay, so these are disturbances to the self, so I give them up, and what is left? Mental agitation, chaos. And trying to go back to the self and remaining in silence becomes a meditation technique instead of remaining in quietude. And for this, there are much more better techniques. This is a very subtle thing to use in a very gross state. And he continues, or in the case ends in this chapter, blessed is the man who has accomplished this. Blessed he is he who is such by nature. So blessed is this man who has accomplished this. So two things. Blessed, because without the blessing, without God's blessing, without the Guru's blessing, it is not possible. So he has to be blessed. And who has accomplished this? Who through sadhana, through spiritual work, has reached the state of perfection, or has released himself from the state of delusion. Blessed is he who is such by nature. So this is a very beautiful and enlightening chapter, abiding in the self. So this blessed is he who is such by nature talks about this higher state of realization, this high soul, this now the self. So not only is it blessed, it is now the source of blessing for others also. Okay.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.